Hey bestie! Grab your popcorn or a martini because we're diving into the drama and spilling the piping hot tea on Marilyn Monroe. This isn't your grandma's history lesson. We're talking forbidden affairs, Hollywood sabotage, and an ending so shady it'll make your head spin. So buckle up. Okay, picture this, Los Angeles, 1926. A baby girl named Norma Jean Mortensen is born into chaos. Her mom, Gladys, was a film cutter. Think old Hollywood's behind-the-scenes crew, but had a mental health spiral that landed her in institutions. And little Norma Jean? She bounced between 12 foster homes before she could even tie her own shoes. Can you imagine? Oh, but the drama in her life did not stop there. When she was 12 years old, she found out she had a sister she never knew about. How can she have a sister and not know it? Well, it turns out that her mother Gladys had been married before, to a man who was 9 years her senior when she was only 14 years old. Gladys gave birth to 2 children during that union, a boy named Robert and a girl named Berenice. But the marriage was a dumpster fire because the man Gladys married was abusive as hell. She eventually divorced him and won sole custody of her kids, but Gladys was then thrown for a loop when her ex-husband kidnapped her kids soon after and moved with them to his native Kentucky. Young Norma Jean, after finding out the truth of how she got separated from her older siblings, would only meet her sister for the first time in her late teens. But anyway, circling back to Norma Jean's childhood, although her mother Gladys was mentally and financially unprepared for a child, her early childhood was actually pretty stable and happy. Gladys placed her daughter with evangelical Christian foster parents Albert and Ida Bollender in the suburban town of Hawthorne. She also lived there for 6 months until she was forced to move back to the city for employment. She then began visiting her daughter on weekends. In the summer of 1933, Gladys bought a small house in Hollywood with a loan from the Homeowners Loan Corporation and moved 7-year-old Norma Jean in with her. They shared the house with lodgers, George and Maud Atkinson, and their daughter Nellie. But the good times would not last. In January 1934, Gladys had a mental breakdown and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. After several months in a rest home, she was committed to the Metropolitan State Hospital. She spent the rest of her life in and out of hospitals and was rarely in contact with her daughter. Norma Jean became a ward of the state, and her mother's friend Grace Goddard took responsibility over her and her mother's affairs. You might wonder where Norma Jean's father was at this point and why he didn't step in to raise his daughter. Well, put simply, that was because she was an illegitimate child. Even though she listed her ex-husband Martin Edward Mortensen as Norma Jean's father, her actual father was Charles Stanley Gifford, Gladys's superior at RKO Studios when she was working as a film cutter. The most scandalous part of all this was that both Gladys and Charles Stanley Gifford were married to other people at the time. It is unclear if Charles Stanley Gifford knew he had a daughter, but if it got out, the scandal would have probably blown up his marriage and family. So Charles Stanley Gifford was not in his daughter's life. So after Norma Jean became a ward of the state for the next 16 months, she continued living with her mother's lodgers, the Atkinsons, and what next happened to her was nothing short of horrific and tragic, because during her stay with them, she was intimately abused. Always a shy girl, her abuse led to her developing a stutter and she became withdrawn. In the summer of 1935, she briefly stayed with Grace and her husband Erwin Goddard and 2 other families. In September 1935, Grace placed her in the Los Angeles Orphans' Home No. 2 Hollygrove. The orphanage was supposed to be a model institution and was described in positive terms by her peers, but little Norma Jean felt abandoned. Encouraged by the orphanage staff, who thought that she would be happier living in a family, Grace became her legal guardian in 1936 but did not take her out of the orphanage until the summer of 1937. Still caught in a whirlwind of bad luck, Norma Jean's second stay with the Goddards lasted only a few months because once again, she became a victim of child intimate abuse and inappropriate touching, this time at the hands of Grace's husband Erwin "Doc" Goddard. She wasn't yet even 16 years old and had already been through the worst things imaginable. From there, Norma Jean then lived for brief periods with her relatives and Grace's friends and relatives in Los Angeles and Compton. But even at the home of one of her relatives, a cousin of hers intimately abused her again. Poor thing could not catch a break. Norma Jean found a more permanent home in September 1938, when she began living with Grace's aunt Anna Lower. Norma Jean started going to junior high school and would attend weekly Christian Science services with Lower. She excelled in writing and contributed to the school newspaper, but she was hardly the sharpest tool in the shed, and her performance as a student can only be described as mediocre. But once again, Norma Jean's brief period of peace did not last. Owing to the elderly Lower's health problems, she returned to live with the Goddards, in the very house her abuser Erwin Doc Goddard lived in about early 1941. That same year, she began attending high school. But even the dubious stability of the Goddard home would soon be taken from her, because the very next year in 1942, the company that employed Doc relocated him to West Virginia. Because California child protection laws prevented the Goddards from taking Norma Jean out of state, she faced the harrowing possibility of having to return to the dreaded orphanage. By 16, Norma Jean dropped out of high school and married her neighbor Jimmy Doherty, a factory worker who was 6 years older than her, just to escape the orphanage. Cute, right? Well, no. Girlie was basically playing house to survive. But here's the plot twist. While Jimmy was off in World War II, Norma Jean moved in with Doherty's parents and began a job at a munitions factory to help the war effort. While working there, she got discovered by the photographer David Conover, who had been sent to the factory to shoot morale-boosting pictures of female workers. Norma Jean quit working at the factory in January 1945 and began modeling for Conover and his friends. Defying her deployed husband and his disapproving mother, she moved on her own and signed a contract with the Blue Book model agency in August 1945. The modeling agency Norma Jean went by the pseudonym Jean Norman and quickly became one of its most ambitious and hard-working models. By early 1946, she had appeared on 33 magazine covers for publications such as Pageant, US Camera, Laugh, and Peak. Norma Jean's stint at the modeling agency eventually led to her signing with an acting agency and then landing a screen test with Ben Lyon, a 20th Century Fox executive. She dyed her mousy brown hair platinum, changed her name to Marilyn Monroe, and dumped Jimmy faster than you can say clout chaser. The rest, as they say, is history. So Marilyn signs with 20th Century Fox, right? But for years she is stuck doing tiny roles in several movies, all while still taking on modeling jobs on the side, and when she finally started getting some real attention as an actress, the studio treated her like a cash cow, not a human. They stuck her in dumb blonde roles such as Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire. The films were highly successful and became iconic, but everyone low-key mocked poor Marilyn Monroe for wanting to be a serious actress. But guess what? She outsmarted them all. Behind the scenes, Marilyn was obsessed with improving her craft. She studied method acting with Lee Strasberg, the guy who trained the likes of Marlon Brando and Al Pacino, started her own production company, and fought valiantly for creative control. But Hollywood's mean execs? They kept sabotaging her. On set, she'd have panic attacks, forget lines, and show up late, not because she was a diva, but because they'd dose her with pills to calm her nerves, and then yell at her for being unprofessional. During this period, Monroe gained a reputation for being difficult to work with, and her career suffered. Her dependence on her acting coaches, Natasha Lytis and then Paula Strasberg, highly irritated directors. Also contributing to Monroe's problems were her perfectionism, low self-esteem, and stage fright. To alleviate her anxiety and chronic insomnia, she began to use barbiturates, amphetamines, and alcohol, which also exacerbated her problems, although she did not become severely addicted until 1956. Some of Monroe's behavior, especially later in her career, was also in response to the condescension and sexism of her male co-stars and the bullying of many of her directors. So yeah, the environment she was in was more toxic than a nuclear waste dumping site. After filming for the 7-year itch wrapped up in November 1954, Monroe left Hollywood for the East Coast, where she and photographer Milton Green founded their own production company named Marilyn Monroe Productions, an action that has later been called instrumental in the collapse of the horrid studio system. Monroe asserted that she was no longer under contract to Fox, as it had not fulfilled its duties, such as paying her the bonuses they promised her. This began a year-long legal battle between her and Fox in January 1955. The press largely ridiculed Monroe, and she was parodied in an insulting Broadway play, in which her look-alike Jane Mansfield played a dumb actress who starts her own production company. Let's now get to the spicy stuff, Marilyn's love life. First up, we have Joe DiMaggio, the Major League Baseball legend. They married in 1954, but problems arose as Joe DiMaggio, accustomed to being the biggest star in the room, became bothered by his wife's skyrocketing fame. Joe was also physically abusive and was obsessively jealous. Allegedly, he hired private investigators to follow her jealous. When she filmed the iconic subway grate scene in The 7-Year Itch, the one where her dress flies up, Joe absolutely lost it. He said that Monroe exposing her legs and thighs, even her crotch, was the last straw. They divorced 9 months later. But plot twist, they still cared for each other after their divorce, and Joe stayed her ride-or-die friend, even faithfully sending roses to her grave 3 times a week every week until he died. Then came Arthur Miller, the Pulitzer-winning playwright. Their 1956 wedding and union was rather rudely dubbed the Egghead and the Hourglass. After getting married, Miller and Monroe spent some time away from showbiz, and for a time, Monroe flourished away from Hollywood in her more normal life. She began cooking, cleaning, and caring for Miller's children, who all loved spending time with her. But inevitably, Marilyn had to get back to work, and she thought that Arthur Miller would save her, write her profound roles, heal her soul and all that, but instead, he low-key resented her fame. While filming The Misfits, a movie written by Miller for her, their marriage imploded. She popped pills and her drug addiction caused problems on set and at home, and shortly before the film's premiere, she and Miller divorced after 5 years of marriage. And in his diaries, he wrote quite a few rude things about her and called her a burden. Ouch, am I right? But wait, the Kennedys. And let's be real, this is the gossip you came here for. Rumor has it Marilyn had affairs with both JFK and his brother RFK. She'd sneak into the White House in disguises, wearing a wig and trench coat, trace chic, and have trysts with the president, and JFK allegedly called her the most unforgettable woman he'd ever met. Then came the famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, 1962 Happy Birthday, Mr. President performance. Marilyn slinked on stage and sang the sexiest rendition of the birthday song like she was purring out a love letter. Her outfit, too, during this stunt was legendary. She wore a beige, skin-tight dress covered in rhinestones, which made her appear as if she were nude. Crowd went wild, and Jackie Kennedy reportedly threatened to divorce JFK over it. And side note here, but other than Marilyn's alleged affair with her husband, Marilyn Monroe and Jackie Kennedy had another connection. In his 2023 biography, Jackie, Public, Private, Secret, J. Randy Taraborelli revealed a surprising connection between Monroe and the former president's wife, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. As it turned out, both women shared the same therapist, Dr. Marianne Criss, whom Jackie began seeing for her PTSD following her husband's assassination. When Jackie confronted her, Dr. Criss said she felt no responsibility to inform her about any former patients in the same way she'd never reveal that she'd ever treated Jackie. Marianne Criss also asked, "How is this relevant?" To which Jackie responded, "How is that not relevant?" Now, let's talk about the mystery that's haunted Hollywood for decades. On August 4, 1962, just months after her sultry Happy Birthday performance, Marilyn was found unalive in her Brentwood home, naked, clutching a phone with enough barbiturates in her system to kill a horse. The cops called it a self-deletion, but girl, please. This case stank to high heaven, and here are the shady details that made it suspicious. Detail number 1. Her housekeeper swore Marilyn was laughing about future plans hours earlier. Number 2. The toxicology report showed enough drugs to put down 10 people, but no pill residue in her stomach. Injections? Maybe. Number 3. The Red Diary. Marilyn allegedly kept a diary detailing her affairs with the Kennedys. Some have speculated that in that diary, she had information linking the two men to organized crime. It vanished after her death. Coincidence? Again, maybe. But why does the FBI still have over 500 classified pages on her? Number 4. RFK was in LA that night. Some say he visited her, others claim he orchestrated a cover-up to protect his brother. Individually, these things can be easily explained away, but taken all together, it is easy to see why the details surrounding Marilyn's untimely demise might cause some to second-guess the official story that was released to the public. Conspiracy theories concerning Marilyn are plentiful. Shady Hollywood executives, the mob, the CIA, a staged self-deletion, even UFOs. But here's the cold truth. Marilyn was a pawn in a world that used her until she had nothing left. An interesting side note to this whole saga is that Marilyn's funeral service was arranged by Joe DiMaggio and Monroe's business manager Inez Melson. Joe DiMaggio was the only one of her ex-husbands to attend. He barred most of Hollywood from attending and believed that they held responsibility for her death. Other stars, like Sophia Loren, asserted that they thought Marilyn ultimately perished from loneliness. Even though Marilyn is long gone now, her beautiful and complicated legacy still lives on because Marilyn wasn't just a sex symbol. She was an overlooked genius who advocated for LGBTQ+ rights long before it became a popular celebrity stance, and wrote poetry about her loneliness. She famously said, "If I'd observed all the rules, I'd never have got anywhere, and honestly, mood." In their first runs, Monroe's 23 movies grossed a total of more than $200 million, and her fame surpassed that of any other entertainer of her time. Her early image as a dumb and seductive blonde gave way in later years to the tragic figure of a sensitive and insecure woman unable to escape the pressures of Hollywood. Her vulnerability and sensuousness, combined with her needless death, eventually raised her to the status of an American cultural icon. Today, she's everywhere: Warhol's art, Taylor Swift's lyrics, and Kim K's Met Gala looks. But let's remember the real Marilyn, the abused orphan who became a goddess, the woman who laughed too loud, loved too hard, and paid the price for living in a world that couldn't handle her magic. So, was her demise self-deletion? Murder? A tragic accident? We'll never know. But next time you see that breathy blonde smile on a poster, remember, Marilyn Monroe was more than just a pinup. She was a real human being with feelings. She experienced hurt, love, tragedy, trials, and glorious triumphs. She was a hurricane in a sequin dress, and Hollywood never saw her coming. P.S. Want more tea? Google Peter Lawford's deathbed confession. You're welcome. Thanks for watching. Please check out the other video at the end of the video and don't forget to subscribe. Subscribing doesn't cost anything, but it means the world to tiny channels like this one.